What does it mean for God to be the leader of our spiritual household? Today we're going to be taking a close look at Psalm 68 to find out. Verse 4 to 6 says, "Sing to God, sing in praise of his name, extol him who rides on the clouds, rejoice before him. His name is the Lord. A father to the fatherless, a defender of widows, is God in his holy dwelling. God sets the lonely in families, he leads out the prisoners with singing, but the rebellious live in a sun-scorched land." What does this teach us about God? If we start with the literal interpretation, we can see the verses divided into two parts in describing the characteristics of our God. He is mighty, as in verse 4, extol him who rides on the clouds, and merciful, as you can see in verse 5 to 6. Let's dive even deeper. Most commentators believe that Psalm 68 is connected with the coming of the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, as you can see in 2 Samuel 6, hence the singing and praising, but not only celebrating that event, but also the faithfulness to God to give Israel victory over her enemies and to make Jerusalem secure enough to bring the Ark into the city. In other Bible translations, lonely can also be translated to solitude. God sets the solitude within the families. He is the one in control, and considering the historical context, we can think of the exiles scattered and dispersed, and by the divine arm they are brought home. God gives the solitary a home to settle down in. In the New Living Translation, this part is translated to "He sets the prisoners free and gives them joy." Berean Standard Bible says he leads the prisoners out to prosperity. King James Version says he brings out those who are bound into prosperity. By looking at these translations, we can see that God will guide the captives to prosperity and they will be joyful. Within the patriarchal society of the ancient Near Israel, this suggests that God will assist those who have lost connections and are struggling to survive by providing for and protecting them. For the rebellious to live in a sun-scorched land and dry land, in a place where farming and livestock are the only way of living, this was simply a death sentence. In contrast to the former statements of who God is, this part shows that the stubborn will be left out with no way of survival. The stubborn rebellion against Jehovah's will was characteristic of the whole course of Israel's history, and it is hinted just as the rebels perished in the wilderness instead of entering Canaan, the murmurers in Babylon, of whom it is plain from Isaiah 40-66 that there were many, will be left there to their fate. To understand our relationship with the God described in the verse even deeper, we have to understand the dynamic of family structures in the ancient Near East. In the ancient Near East, the household was at the center of social and everyday life. The relation between gender and family connection defined an ancient Near Easterners' place in their house, which in turn secured their survival in this isolated society. The survival of the individual was directly tied to their connection to an household. Women, children, and men before they became a patriarch, slaves, and everything the Beit Av consisted of were under the patriarch of the tribe. They were also patrilineal, meaning that the line continued through the father's side to the sons, the firstborn son. The ancient Near Eastern society was also patrilocal, meaning that it was made up of family compounds that contained individual houses for families built around the oldest male of the family. These family compounds were called the Beit Av, meaning the house of the father in Hebrew. In John Nielsen's book, A Companion to the Ancient Near East, he describes the Beit Av as both a physical space and a constructed concept that protected and sustained the individual. Through the physical space of the compound, the families were able to grow and farm enough food to sustain their families through private farming. Much of the land in the ancient Near East was not suitable for agriculture, so the physical land was incredibly valuable within society. David Skolin discusses the importance of fertile land to this ancient Near Easterns in his book, The House of the Father as Fact, a Symbol. He writes, "The land available for agriculture was scarce. The inheritance was importable. The land's people survived as dependent household workers in a complex family as servants or in some form of adoption." Widows were especially a vulnerable group of people in the ancient Near East. Under the patriarchal and patrilineal system, women had little to no control over their own lives. Widows had even less. When a woman gets married, she often moves far away from their original family and loses all connection to them. If a woman is widowed without a male child, it is up to her husband's male family members to decide her fate. If they're kind enough, one of her brothers-in-law would marry her, allowing her to stay within the Beit Av, but if that's not the case, she is forced to leave the Beit Av. She could try to return to her original family, but sometimes even her original family would reject the widow, leaving her without a support system, a home, or any way to get important resources. Like the widow, the orphans are very similarly vulnerable within the ancient Near Eastern society. Since survival of an individual is closely tied to their connection to the Beit Av, orphans are in an unstable position. If a child's parents were to both die, they would lose their connection to the Beit Av, hence all vital connections to survival. Sometimes family members within the Beit Av would take on the orphan child, but if the family doesn't have enough resources to take on the child, they would be cast out of the Beit Av and have to fend for themselves. How does this give meaning to our relationship with God? As we've seen in the literary interpretation and the historical social interpretation, God is our spiritual leader and father like the patriarch of his Beit Av. He is mighty and merciful, the caretaker of our survival, for food, a house to dwell, social connections, marriage, and even our careers. When we are at our weakest, just as orphans, widows, and foreigners were in the ancient Near East, not being able to survive without a Beit Av, God cares for us as the Father, the Patriarch, and as our defender in his holy dwelling, and he provides us the social and physical needs for our survival. He does not accept every behavior, but has also informed us that he will leave those who rebel against him in dry land, but is merciful to bring us back in from exile.